Welcome back to Naked History. I'm Dylan, and this is the third and final main episode of our 250th special, where we have been wandering through the haunted house of the American experiment like extremely nosy historical inspectors. In episode 1, we opened the front door. We found a revolution that was not inevitable, not tidy, and not unanimous. We found colonies pulled into crisis by empire, taxes, print culture, protest, and war. We found a declaration that was both a weapon and a promise. We met the first ghost, the word all. In episode 2, we opened the locked rooms. We listened to the people who heard the revolution's promises and had every reason to ask, does this include me? Enslaved people, indigenous nations, women, loyalist, poor farmers, soldiers, and veterans. People who complicated the birthday party because they remember who had to clean up afterward. But today, we go down. The air gets colder down here. The fireworks above us are still going, but now they sound distant, like celebration happening through several layers of floorboard and denial. Below us is the basement. And the basement is where the house keeps the machinery. War, expansion, law, debt, nationalism, borders, policing, and memory. The things that keep the house running. The things that make the pipes groan at night. Our main question today is the hardest of the series. What do we do with a country built from both genuine ideals and genuine harm? Not one or the other, but both. Because the American founding was not only hypocrisy, it was not only liberty, it was not only violence, it was hope. It was a machine made from contradictions, and we are still living inside it. So mind your step. The basement light flickers a little bit. Let's get into it. The revolution didn't end with a clean fade out and a patriotic soundtrack. Independence is not the same thing as stability. Now, winning a war is hard, but building a government afterward is also hard, especially when everyone has spent years saying centralized authority is suspicious, and also everyone owns a musket. The new United States emerged from the revolution with debt, with damaged trade, with weak national authority, unpaid soldiers, competing state interests, border conflicts, and deep uncertainty about whether this whole experiment could actually function outside of a pamphlet. The Articles of Confederation created a loose union of states. That looseness was intentional. Americans had just fought a war against what they saw as an imperial overreach. Many feared concentrated power, and they didn't want to replace King George with King George, the local edition. So the national government had limited power. It could conduct diplomacy and manage some shared concerns, but it could not tax directly in a strong way. And it struggled to regulate commerce. It depended heavily on the states. And this created problems almost immediately. The national government owed money. The states owed money. Soldiers were owed money. Creditors wanted repayment, and farmers faced taxes, and trade was unstable, and paper currency lost value. So the courts pursued debts, and ordinary people who had survived the revolution now faced the charming sequel, economic distress. Nothing says liberty like coming home from war and meeting a creditor with excellent penmanship. Now, the most dramatic warning came in Massachusetts with Shays' Rebellion in 1786 and 1787. Farmers, many of them veterans, protested debt collection and taxes in court actions that threatened their farms and property. They shut down courts to prevent foreclosures and debt judgments. They believed the post-war government was failing people who had sacrificed for independence. Now, to political elites, this looked terrifying. They saw disorder, mob rule, and possible collapse of Republican government. To the protesters, it looked like survival. Both fear and grievance mattered. Now, Shays' Rebellion helped convince many leaders that the Articles of Confederation were too weak. The new nation needed a stronger central government, or the whole house might just collapse before it finished hanging the curtains. So in 1787, delegates gathered in Philadelphia for the Constitutional Convention. And this is where the American memory starts lighting candles and starts playing inspirational music. We imagine wise men calmly designing the perfect government while sunbeams pour through the windows and liberty politely takes notes. Now, the reality was argument. It was very, very deep argument. Large states versus small states, North versus South, federal power versus state power, democracy versus elite control, representation, taxation, trade, and executive authority, courts, the amendments and the ratifications, and slavery. Always slavery. Sometimes spoken directly, sometimes buried inside compromise, and sometimes handled with euphemisms so delicate you almost forgot they were discussing human bondage. Almost. Now, the Constitution strengthened the federal government, created a new structure with executive, legislative, and judicial branches. It gave the national government greater power to tax, regulate commerce, conduct foreign policy, and act with authority. It was innovative, and it was also compromised. The 3/5 compromise counted enslaved people for representation and taxation in a way that increased the political power of slaveholding states without recognizing enslaved people as citizens with rights. The Constitution protected the international slave trade from federal prohibition until 1808. Fugitive slave provisions strengthened the claims of enslavers across state lines. And the machinery worked, but it worked for some people by grinding others. And that is a basement truth. The early republic expanded self-government for some while protecting bondage for others. It created structures that would support democratic development while embedding inequality into law and politics. The Constitution was not the inevitable fulfillment of the Declaration, it was a political settlement. And like most settlements, it involved some problems by postponing others. But now we hear another sound in the basement. Wheels, the sound of axles, the sound of boots moving west, surveyor tools clanking, the house is expanding. And expansion is the long shadow of independence. The United States was born with land hunger already in its bloodstream. Western land had been central to colonial politics before independence. After the Revolution, the new republic claimed a vast territory east of the Mississippi River. But claimed is doing a lot of suspicious work here because those lands were not empty, they were home to the Native Americans. Now, the new nation had to decide what kind of country it would become, and one answer arrived fairly quickly. It wanted to become bigger. Expansion became tied to opportunity, citizenship, farming, wealth, security, and national destiny. Land was imagined as a reward for independence and the future of the republic. But westward movement was not a peaceful unfolding into blank space. It involved treaties made under pressure, treaties broken, military campaigns, forced concessions, settler violence, native resistance, land speculation, federal policy, and eventual forced removal. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 created a process for admitting new states from Western Territory and banned slavery in the Northwest Territory. It was significant. It laid out a vision of orderly expansion, but orderly for whom? The structure of expansion treated indigenous lands as something the United States could organize, purchase, pressure, divide, or conquer. Now, the native nations continued to assert sovereignty. They defended their homelands and they negotiated with the United States, Britain, Spain, and one another. They adapted, resisted, and fought. This was not a misunderstanding over property lines. This was a collision between settler republic, hungry for land, and indigenous nations defending their worlds. In the Ohio Country, native resistance challenged U.S. expansion. Leaders such as Little Turtle of the Miami and Blue Jacket of the Shawnee helped lead resistance against American forces. The United States suffered serious defeats before winning at the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794. The Treaty of Greenville in 1795 opened large parts of present-day Ohio to American settlement. And that pattern would repeat: pressure, treaty, settlement, conflict, more pressure, and more land loss. By the 19th century, expansion hardened into policies of removal. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 under Andrew Jackson helped drive the forced displacement of native nations from the southeast, including the Cherokee, the Muskogee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Seminole peoples. The Trail of Tears was not an unfortunate travel complication, it was a state backed dispossession. Now, America didn't simply build a house and to discover it needed more room. Expansion was a part of the architecture. The porch kept moving. The language of liberty traveled with settlers, soldiers, missionaries, surveyors, speculators, and politicians, and so did law, but so did violence. And so did the belief that the Republic had a very special destiny. By the time the phrase manifest destiny became famous in the 1840s, the appetite was already generations old. The United States expanded through purchase, through war, through treaty, annexation, settlement removal, and coercion. The Louisiana Purchase, the War of 1812, the annexation of Texas, the Mexican-American War, Oregon, California, and the Great Plains, all the way to the Pacific. Each expansion had its own local history, and each came with its own human cost. And again, the same question returned. Can a nation built on liberty expand by denying the freedom and sovereignty of others? Now, America often answered with speeches, and then it took land. Now we climb part way back upstairs. Not all the way, just enough to reach the parlor. Now, the parlor is where guests are received, where the nice furniture lives, it's where the family portraits hang. It's the room you clean before company comes over while shoving everything suspicious into a closet and praying nobody is curious. Now, over time, America redecorated this room aggressively, because countries don't only have histories, they have memories. And memory is not the same thing as history. History is messy. It asks questions. It follows evidence. It says things like, actually, this was more complicated, which is why history is rarely invited to light conversation. Now, memory selects. Memory frames. Memory chooses a portrait, adjusts the lighting, and hides the cracked chair and says, please don't open that cabinet. Now, every country has founding myths. America just put ours in a powdered wig, gave them a commemorative plate, and dared anyone to ask where the receipt went. The Revolution became a usable story. Paintings turned dense political moments into sacred scenes. Schoolbooks simplified conflict into moral clarity. 4th of July speeches transformed independence into destiny. Monuments gave stone bodies to national memory, and the founders became secular saints. Their flaws were softened. Their contradictions were minimized, their conflict cleaned up, and their world was made safe for classroom posters. Now, this didn't happen all at once. Memory changed over time, and different generations used the revolution for different purposes. Early national leaders used revolutionary memory to build unity. Political parties fought over who truly represented the founding. Abolitionists used the Declaration against slavery, and enslavers claimed the Revolution as a defense of white self-government. Suffragists invoked founding ideals, and civil rights activists demanded that America live up to its own language. The Revolution was never only past. It was ammunition. It still is. Now, the 4th of July became a ritual of national storytelling, with rituals, speeches, parades, military displays, public readings, fireworks, flags, songs, picnics, and eventually commercial branding turned independence into annual performance. Now, some of these performances are joyful and meaningful. People need rituals. Communities need shared moments, and celebration is not inherently dishonest. But commemoration becomes dangerous when it requires amnesia. When it says love means silence. When it says complexity is disloyal. And when it treats criticism as vandalism instead of maintenance. That is how national memory becomes interior decorating. A portrait here, a flag there. Hey, maybe hide the water damage. Let's add a brass plaque. Put a school group in front of it and say freedom loudly enough, and maybe no one will ask about the locked rooms. But the ghosts do not leave because the parlor looks nice. They wait, and sometimes they set the house on fire. Now, the Civil War was not an interruption of the American story. It was the return of the founding contradiction with a cannon. The Revolution declared equality while permitting slavery. The Constitution compromised with slavery, and expansion spread the conflict over slavery into new territories and states. Political parties fractured over it, and churches split. Families even split over it, and Congress bargained, delayed, threatened, compromised, and failed. Slavery was not a side issue, it was central to the crisis of the House. The enslaved labor of millions of black people produced enormous wealth. Slaveholding elites wielded national power, and the question of slavery shaped representation, expansion, law, violence, and identity. Every new territory raised the question: free state or slave state? And every compromise bought time and changed interest. The Missouri Compromise, the Compromise of 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, Bleeding Kansas, Dred Scott, John Brown, secession. The ghosts were not in the walls anymore. They were in the streets, in Congress, in courtrooms, in plantations, in newspapers, and on battlefields. When Abraham Lincoln described the nation as conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, he was reaching back to the declaration during a war over whether a nation with that founding claim could survive half free and half slave. The Civil War became, among other things, a test of whether the founding promise could be reborn in a more truthful form. But emancipation was not simply handed down from above like a benevolent lightning bolt. Enslaved people forced the issue. They fled to Union lines and they withheld labor. They gathered information. They served as guides, workers, and soldiers, and abolitionists had fought for decades. Black soldiers served and died, and the war changed because enslaved people made slavery impossible to treat as background. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery, except as punishment for crime. The 14th promised birthright citizenship and equal protection to all people within the United States. The 15th prohibited denying the vote based on race, color, or a previous condition of servitude. These were all revolutionary changes, a second founding, some historians may call it. But again, the House did not become whole because the law changed. Reconstruction brought hope. Black political participation, public education, the new state constitutions, an attempt to build multiracial democracy in the South. It also brought with it white supremacist violence, political betrayal, federal retreat, black disenfranchisement, segregation, convict leasing terror, and the long architecture of Jim Crow. The founding contradiction returned because it had not fully been exercised. And that doesn't mean that nothing did change. Change happened. People fought for it and people died for it. People built schools, churches, newspapers, organizations, lawsuits, campaigns, coalitions, and movements. The promise expanded because people were forced to expand it. And that's one of the central truths of this whole special. America's best ideals have often been made by people who America excluded. The word all became honest because people outside the original circle kept demanding entry, not politely but persistently. But now we leave the basement. We pass the parlor with its decorated myths. We pass the portraits, past the locked rooms. Some open now, some still stuck, some relabeled by people who hope labels count as repairs. And we return to the front of the house, and we step on the porch, and the night air hits differently. Fireworks are still going. Crickets sing in the grass, and somewhere someone is laughing. Somewhere else, someone is arguing about politics with the emotional range of a raccoon trapped in a garage. America, in other words, continues. The porch is where the episode breathes. Because after all this, after the revolution, the exclusions, the expansion, the myth-making, the Civil War, the unfinished work, we have to ask what commemoration is for. What is patriotism when it tells the truth? What does celebration owe to complexity? Can a country be loved without being flattered? And what does it mean to inherit unfinished work? I think honest patriotism is not national self-esteem with fireworks. It's not pretending the house is perfect because you live in it. It's not screaming freedom loudly enough to drown out the people asking freedom for whom. And it's not treating every criticism like betrayal. Sometimes criticism is care. Sometimes truth-telling is maintenance, and sometimes the person pointing out the crack in the foundation is not trying to destroy the house. They're just trying to keep it from collapsing on everybody inside. Now, at 250 years, the United States is old enough to stop demanding birthday flattery. It can handle a complicated party. There can be fireworks and footnotes. cake and contradictions, flags and accountability, love and grief, pride and repair. The revolution matters, the declaration matters, the constitutions matter. The people excluded from those documents matter as well. The people who expanded their meanings, the people harmed by the nation's growth matter. The people who kept pushing America towards its own promises matter. And in the next 250 years depend in part on whether we can tell the truth about the first 250 without turning honesty into heresy. Now, the American experiment is not a finished building. It never was. It's a drafty old house, full of additions, repairs, locked rooms, hidden damage, but with beautiful windows, but some bad plumbing, and arguments in the hallway, and ghosts with excellent documentation. Some people want to burn it down. Some people want to pretend that nothing is wrong. And some people want to renovate but only keep the original countertops. And some people keep showing up with tools. And that work is not glamorous. Maintenance rarely is, but democracy is not self-cleaning. Liberty is not self-executing. Memory is not self-executing. And rights are not self-executing. A promise does not become true because it is old. It becomes true because people keep making it answer to the living. Now the door opens. Not the front door this time, but the porch door. The night is warm and the fireworks burst overhead. Red, white, and blue. But for a moment, they are beautiful, in exactly the way fireworks are beautiful. Loud, brief, a little dangerous, and absolutely convinced that they are the main event. So you step outside, and behind you the house remains. The American experiment, in all its glitz and glamour and creaky floorboards. The front door, the printing room, the treason table, the locked rooms, the basement, the parlor, and the porch. The portraits are still watching, and the ghosts are still moving, but the fireworks sound different now. Not less joyful, but just less simple. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the goal is not to celebrate less, but it's to celebrate more honestly. To understand that a country can be loved without being lied to. That a founding can be meaningful without being immaculate. That inheritance is not the same thing as endorsement. History is not here to ruin the party. History is here to make sure we know whose house we're standing in. So happy birthday, America. You beautiful, impossible, drafty old house. We're still inside you, and we're still definitely arguing over the floor plan. And somewhere in the walls, the ghosts are still asking if we meant what we said. So as always, I've been Dylan, and this has been Naked History. Thanks for walking through this house with me. Maybe we'll see each other again in another 250.